In this episode, we talk about the issue that was raised regarding Netflix's series IC-814, The Kandahar Hijack, based on the 1999 hijack of an Indian Airlines flight. We also talk about what Bangladesh's interim government's chief advisor, Dr Muhammad Yunus, had to say regarding the ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. But first, we talk about PM Modi's visit to Brunei and Singapore. Hi, I am Niharika Nanda and you are listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. During this week, Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited two nations, Brunei and Singapore, and met with his counterparts. The Prime Minister arrived in the capital of Brunei on an official visit at the invitation of Sultan Haji Hassan Al Bolkiah, Brunei's PM. This was the first ever bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Brunei, and it coincided with the 40th anniversary of establishment of diplomatic ties between both the nations. This was followed by the PM's visit to Singapore. PM Modi was invited by the Prime Minister of Singapore, Lawrence Wong. This was his fifth visit to Singapore in his 10-year term. During his visit to both these nations, Prime Minister Narendra Modi discussed the expansion of bilateral relations with his counterparts. To understand why these visits hold significance for India, we have Indian Express's Diplomatic Affairs editor, Shubhajit Roy, joining us. Shubhajit, let's begin by talking about Brunei. So, Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently visited the nation. Why was his visit significant?
Well, firstly, this was the first ever visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Brunei. And it's been 40 years since Brunei became independent. So this was commemorated as a visit on the 40th anniversary of Brunei's independence. And the Sultan of Brunei has been in power for the longest, he's the longest serving reigning monarch right now since 1967. And he used to be the richest person in the world, and now he is one of the richest person in the world. And this particular visit came at a time when there are tensions in the South China Sea, where China's aggressive behavior in the region has given rise to higher tensions. Recently, there was a face-off between a vessel from Philippines and Chinese vessel. So in that context, in fact, on South China Sea, Brunei also has maritime claims, which it is not as vocal as some of the other countries, but it still takes some claim in the South China Sea, with which it has a dispute with China. So from that perspective, also from the maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region, this was an important visit. Apart from that, the two sides also have cooperation on defense and trade, investment, energy, space, and a whole lot of things. So that's how this particular visit was important from India's perspective.
And how do we see bilateral ties growing between the two countries?
Well, we saw during the talks, both sides spoke on economy, strategic sectors, and energy sector. On energy sector, Prime Minister Modi and Sultan of Brunei, Hassan Al Bolkiah, they essentially discussed on a long-term cooperation on procuring LNG from Brunei. And in defense cooperation, they talked about possibilities of cooperation in defense industry, training, and capacity building. In the space sector also, they decided to strengthen their cooperation in satellite development, remote sensing, and training. And they also said that they would have direct flights between the two countries. So Brunei was the first bilateral visit by an Indian PM, but it also is in line with the Act East policy. So Brunei is an important partner in India's Act East policy and the Indo-Pacific vision. And Brunei's Sultan has already paid 4 visits to India so far. In fact, in 2018, when he was in India, he was the chief guest at the Republic Day Parade along with other ASEAN leaders. So that is how India sort of framing its bilateral cooperation. Also, Brunei, unlike some of the other countries with claims in the South China Sea, Brunei has kept silent on its claim to a relatively small area of northern Borneo, which is part of Brunei. But it has chosen to focus on growing trade ties with China as it diversifies its economy. So, New Delhi India is looking at capitalizing on the potential to tap into Brunei's China plus one strategy. And India also has vital stakes in the South China Sea. As you know, almost 55% of its trade passes through the disputed waters.
Now, coming to the Prime Minister's visit to Singapore, would you say that this visit was more significant than his visit to Brunei?
Well, the Singapore as a relationship has been a very top of the mind relationship for India. This was Prime Minister Modi's fifth visit in the last 10 years to Singapore. So that tells you the sort of level of high level interaction that India and Singapore have had. In fact, just a few days ago, there was this high-powered ministerial roundtable between India and Singapore, which took place where 4 Indian senior cabinet ministers went to Singapore, which included Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and IT Minister, Information Broadcasting Minister Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav. So they went to Singapore and they had a meeting with about 6 cabinet ministers, union ministers from the Singaporean side. So if you really see, the two sides have had a very productive visit in the last few weeks. And this Prime Minister's visit came just months after a newly elected Prime Minister of Singapore took office, Lawrence Wong. So he's taken over as the new Prime Minister, and Prime Minister Modi is beginning or in the first few months of his third term as Prime Minister. So the close contact, high-level contact, tells you the kind of importance that India attaches to the Singapore relationship.
And like you mentioned when we were talking about Brunei, the South China Sea issue, which was somewhat of a common issue as far as both these countries are concerned. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it impacts the relationship between China and Singapore?
Yeah, so, as I said, on the South China Sea, where China's aggressive posture has raised tensions, the two sides, Indian Prime Minister and the Singapore Premier, they held discussions on that, and they reaffirmed the importance of maintaining and promoting peace, security, stability, safety, and freedom of navigation in and overflight above the South China Sea, while pursuing the peaceful resolution of disputes in accordance with international law, which is the UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The two sides in the joint statement also called on all parties to resolve disputes through peaceful means without threat or use of force, and exercise self-restraint in the conduct of actions that could escalate tensions in the region. So there is a sort of concern in Singapore as well on China's behavior in the South China Sea, and that was the broad message that was sent out on this particular issue.
And Shubhajit, what issues were discussed by PM Modi and Lawrence Wong, the Prime Minister of Singapore?
Yeah, so the two prime ministers, as we had reported earlier, they witnessed the exchange of MOUs on 4 areas. They included in the field of digital technologies, in the field of semiconductors, in the field of health and medicine, and the last one on educational cooperation and skills development.
And Shubhajit, if we talk about the Semiconductor Pact, can you tell us why was the MOU that was signed regarding it particularly more significant?
The MOU on India-Singapore Semiconductor Ecosystem Partnership is extremely significant, as both sides agreed that advanced manufacturing, particularly in developing resilient semiconductor supply chains, can be a new pillar of bilateral cooperation. India and Singapore have had issues across. There are a lot of common elements the two countries have. Semiconductor is a new area the two sides are discussing and have signed this pact. Despite being a small city state, Singapore has a very well developed semiconductor industry. In fact, Singapore contributes to around 10% of global semiconductor output, and semiconductor sector itself contributes to almost 8% of Singapore's economic growth. Almost half of top semiconductor firms have their base in Singapore. So, semiconductor plants in Singapore are currently clustered in 4 wafer fabrication parks that span about 374 hectares, almost 400 hectares. So, in that sense, Singapore is now getting the benefits of global focus on de-risking and improving supply chain resilience, as it appears to be a safe bet in the era of US-China rivalry. So, India finds that, India can become a partner there by collaborating on talent development, by, Singaporean cities have developed customized courses for semiconductor sector. It can have knowledge sharing about best practices of managing semiconductor industrial parks. And in terms of factors of production, Singapore has limitations for land and labor. Now, India with abundant land and skilled labor can be part of Singapore's semiconductor value chain. So, it is in that framework India has signed a pact with Singapore.
And Shubhajit, ever since Prime Minister Narendra Modi entered his third term, he has been visiting multiple countries, whether it is Russia, Ukraine, Singapore or Brunei and more. So how would you say these visits are going to impact India?
This is part of engaging with partners who, India sees has potential for expanding opportunities for India's economic growth and for creating more employment, more jobs. That's the focus of Singapore leg. It also ties in with India's Act East policy, these two visits. On Russia-Ukraine, it was more to do with how India could play an active role in resolving the conflict between the two countries. And if you circle back to the visit to Italy, it was essentially meant at rebuilding or consolidating India's ties with the Western partners, especially US and Europe, and as well as Japan. So from that perspective, this has been the focus. And in the next few weeks and months, we'll see possibly the Prime Minister also heading towards the US and Russia, and also some of the Southeast Asian countries, including Laos, PDR, and to Brazil for the G20 summit. So this is part of India's diplomatic effort to shore up support and shore up friendship and partnership with countries from the neighborhood to countries which are located far away.
Next, we talk about Netflix's series IC-814, The Kandahar Hijack. On 29th August, Netflix released IC-814, The Kandahar Hijack, a series based on a real-life event from 1999 when an Indian Airlines flight from Kathmandu to Delhi was hijacked on 24th December and taken to Kandahar in Afghanistan. The hijack ended more than a week later.
It is a very dark episode in modern Indian history.
That's Indian Express's Divya A.
This was a very, very major incident at that time under the Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, so which lasted for, I think, about 7-8 days. It started on 24 December 99 and went all till January. And eventually India had to release 3 dreaded terrorists and secure the release of over 150 Indian hostages. One passenger was also stabbed and killed in the process.
Soon after the series was released, it stirred up a controversy which led to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting sending out summons to Netflix's representatives. To learn about the issue that was raised regarding the series and what steps have been taken regarding the same, we have Indian Express's Divya A joining us. Divya, to begin with, can you tell us what issues surfaced when Netflix's series IC-814 came out?
So the series IC-814, which is based on the 1999 incident of the Indian Airlines plane hijack, it started streaming on Netflix on August 29. However, it was only a couple of days after it actually was streaming that this controversy came up where many believed that, the code names of the 5 hijackers were of course used during the series, but their actual identities were not revealed at any point of time. And the code names essentially that were used were Hindu names or Hindu aliases, whereas their actual identities, as per documented records, they were Pakistani terrorists, and they had different surnames. But at any point in the series, their real identities were not given out. So that is what became a bone of contention a few days after the series rolled out.
And Divya, if we talk about the reality, according to the available facts, were these aliases correct?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, as per a statement by the Home Ministry in 2000, January 6, the entire statement was given by the Home Minister, and he stated that these were Harkatul Mujahideen terrorists from Pakistan. Their real names were also given. But however, it said that during the hijack on the plane, they used different code names or different aliases, which were Burger, Shankar, Bhola, Chief and Doctor, which is how the series identifies them. However, the only grouse that many viewers had that even though it's a factual recorded fact, but their real identities also had to be put out in some way at any point in the series.
Right. And what all issues were flagged by the INB ministry?
Well, even though it started as a thing about, hurting the religious sentiments of a vast majority of people in this country by not revealing the true religious identity or true identity of the terrorist who came from Pakistan, there were also certain other issues that eventually came up while the discussions were held and when the Netflix content head was summoned by the officials of the Information and Broadcasting Ministry in Delhi. So the other issues that came up was that the role of Pakistani ISI was apparently whitewashed. They were not named as such in the series, and it spoke about the incident. It spoke about the role of the Afghan militants and all of that, but it never pinpointed to the role of ISI. And it also showed the Indian side, the Indian government officials who were negotiating also in a little bit of a lighter vein, and they seemed to be struggling. So the grouse was about the portrayal that, as many said, the hijackers were supposed to be like cold-blooded criminals, terrorists. So it should have come through, but they were really humanized in the series. At the same time, the INB officials had also flagged to Netflix on many occasions earlier also about keeping the sentiments and culture of the country in mind, because there is no censor board for OTT like there is for films, so you can rate them. But OTT is, free to air, so there is no system of saying some checks and balances. So they have also been told that they have to work on complaints regarding the nudity aspect in some of their shows, and they have to keep Indian culture and sensitivity in mind.
And Divya, what are the orders that have been given by the INB ministry to Netflix post this incident? And has Netflix revealed how they are going to deal with this issue?
As we spoke to officials in the INB ministry on the day the meeting happened, so they told us that they brought to the Netflix India's attention the issue that, it is hurting the sentiments of many people across the country, and they have, even though there was no plan to ban the series or block it or take it off air, but somehow the factual record that these were Pakistani terrorists and these were their real names had to be put out in the beginning, and it was left to Netflix India to suggest how that can be done. So we see that from the next day onwards, they started a disclaimer in the beginning of the series where they said that the series is based on this incident. However, it is fictitious, it is a dramatized representation, and it also said that as per the government statement or official statement, even though the terrorists use these aliases, which is Shankar, Bhola, Burger, Doctor and Chief, their real names were also given and identified as such. However, even that has come under fire now, 2 days down the line, because many people who are watching these series from outside India, they say that this disclaimer is only part of Netflix India, where it is streamed in India. However, to everybody outside the world, those aliases somehow became the true identities of the terrorists. So that has to be taken care of. Well, it remains to be seen if the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting steps in again and does something about it.
And what kind of political reactions has the series prompted?
Yeah, so political reactions was largely about using Hindu names for the terrorists, which were not actually Hindu by identity, as was factually recorded. Plus, it was also about a lot of politics, which said that the makers are trying to whitewash the role of ISI. So the BJP people really, took it up, gave public statements. For instance, senior BJP leader Rajiv Chandrasekhar also said that, this is an attempt to obfuscate the facts. And BJP IT cell chief Amit Malviya also said that, this is not done and this is deliberate. However, other leaders from the opposition parties also voiced their opinion. For instance, former Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Omar Abdullah said that, like Kashmir file was not a gospel truth, even this movie was not a gospel truth. So many people said that it should be viewed as a work of art, as a creative work of art. However, when something pertains to a real life incident and an incident of this scale, so varied reactions are bound to happen. That is what happened in this case. And we also see where it goes from here, because apparently now there is a huge issue about this disclaimer only coming up in Netflix India and not everywhere.
And Divya, if we talk about Anubhav Sinha, the maker of the series, has he reacted to this development, and have any of the cast members given any reactions?
Yeah, so Anubhav Sinha, the director of the series, when he was asked about this issue at an event, so he did not give any direct response to it, but he said that censorship is the law of the land and every filmmaker or every creative person has to follow that. So he will do whatever it takes. Even the other actors, other cast members of the series were asked similar questions. So for instance, Nasiruddin Shah, senior actor, when he was asked, he said that, when IC-814 hijack happened, he was also worried that this will lead to Islamophobia. So these were the kind of things. So creative subjects are always open to interpretation. So they have given their interpretation. But I think the only plausible grouse was not about giving the true identities of hijackers at any point. But however, the makers are also under fire for trying to, being evasive about the role of Pakistani terrorists and ISI in the whole scenario.
Right. And Divya, have similar instances happened before as well, where a work of art, which could be a film or a series, was advised to make changes on similar grounds?
Well, these kind of things keep happening, especially with OTT. It happens far too often because there is no check and balance and in the pre-release stage. So only after it's out and people watch it and then some people react to it, then things flare up. For instance, even in the case of this upcoming film Emergency, we have seen that, it has still not got the censor certificate. And so even that, issue apparently pertains to hurting the sentiments of the Sikhs involved, because SGPC has complained also, about the production house. So we see that playing out as well. And in February this year, when Netflix had released a series on Indrani Mukherjee, even that was CBI had filed a plea in the court to stall the series till the trial is on, because it said that, humanizing a criminal can affect the proceedings and affect the trial. So these kind of things do come into play once in a while, but with OTT, this has been happening far too often.
And in the end, we talk about Bangladesh. Yesterday, Chief Advisor to Bangladesh's interim government, Dr Muhammad Yunus, said that ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's political remarks from India were an unfriendly gesture. He asserted that there was discomfort in Bangladesh over Hasina's statements from India. He added that relations between the two countries are now at a low. Yunus told news agency PTI from his official residence in Dhaka, quote, "If India wants to keep her until the time Bangladesh government wants her back, the condition would be that she has to keep quiet." Unquote. On 13th August, Hasina released a statement demanding those involved in killings and vandalism during the anti-government protests be identified and punished. He added, quote, We have said quite firmly that she should keep quiet. She has been given shelter there and she is campaigning from there. It is not that she has gone there on a normal course. She has fled following a people's uprising and public anger. Sitting in India, she is speaking and giving instructions. No one likes it. It is not good for us or for India. There is discomfort regarding it." Unquote. Yunus also emphasized that Hasina has to be brought back to Bangladesh and tried in front of everyone. Yunus stressed that while Bangladesh values strong bilateral relations with India, New Delhi must move beyond the narrative that portrays every other political party except Awami League as Islamist. The interview with PTI comes weeks after Yunus and Prime Minister Narendra Modi interacted over phone in a first high-level contact between the nations following the fall of Hasina's government. After their conversation, the Ministry of External Affairs, in a statement, indicated that the two leaders discussed ways to take the bilateral relationship forward in line with the respective national priorities. Following anti-government uprisings that peaked on 5th August, Hasina resigned as Prime Minister and fled to India. Her presence in India for nearly 4 weeks has fueled speculation in Bangladesh, and with the ex-Prime Minister facing multiple criminal cases back at home, it is likely that Bangladesh may soon push for her extradition. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Niharika Nanda. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.